I have everybody muted right now because we are going to be hearing from Joanne Johnson. And Joanne Johnson is our SoCal Network District Student and Young Adult Director. And so we are really excited to have her on here today with us. And she's going to be talking about being the elephant in the room. And she has some interactive portions that she would like to have throughout the chat today, the webinar today. So I will keep everybody muted until it's time for, just so that she has the floor, she's able to have the mic for the duration of the webinar. But then if we have Q&A or if we have anything like that, I can go ahead and unmute people. And if we have time at the end, we can possibly have a Q&A. This is being recorded, so we'll be able to send this out to you if you have to step away, if you miss anything, or for anybody who wasn't able to be here live that registered, you will get a copy of the recording. And then also we have a chat function. So if you are able to, or if you have a question and you're muted or anything else, you can connect with everybody. You can connect with me privately. You can connect with anybody on the list privately or publicly, however you decide to do that. So you can chat even if your mic is muted. So we just want to, encourage you to do be as interactive as possible. So with that being said, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. And I'm going to give the floor over to Joanne. And I'm just going to make sure that everybody's muted at this point. And I'll let Joanne go ahead and take over for us.
Awesome. Well, it is an honor and a privilege to be able to share with you today. And I do want this to be interactive. So whether your video is sharing or not, in just a minute, I'm going to be giving something that you can either access on your computer, on your phone, just to kind of get some interesting feedback from you guys. But a little bit of my background. I grew up not really Christian. We owned a Bible, but we didn't use it. And then we went to church on Christmas and Easter. My mom was offended one time when I said I didn't grow up Christian. So now I say kind of Christian. And she was a very strong leader. She was definitely the head of the household. And so that was my influence growing up, was a strong female leader. And I remember in 6th grade, when we were supposed to say what we wanted to be when we grow up, I was like, I want to be the president of the United States. And so from as far back as I can remember, God has just put in my heart a desire for leadership and all of that. And then I got saved when I was in high school, really saved. I found out what a relationship with Jesus was, invited him into my heart, and shortly after that, felt like God was leading me to become a pastor. That was the word God was giving me, which is you're going to be a pastor. And it wasn't until I got into college, APU, Christian college, that I met people that didn't think a female could be a pastor. So it wasn't until I reached the church that I found out that there was an impression out there that a female could not do everything that a man could do. Prior to that 21 years, that was my impression, was a female can do anything. A female can be anything. And so from that, God has shown me so many things. I've read so many books. I've cried tears. I've been frustrated, and I wanted to, today, where I'm hoping to take us is first give, even though we are part of the Assemblies of God, I want to give kind of a framework for theologically why we believe that. And if you've ever heard the term feminist theology, that's actually an okay term, but for some people it's a negative term, so I'm going to go a little bit into that. And then also I want to get into even though we believe in the Assemblies of God that a female can have every role and responsibility that a male can, that's not what we find in every situation that we enter into. And even if our pastor or leader ascribes that way, it does not mean that we are treated equally. And so how can we still lead well in the middle of those situations? How can we walk through those with grace and still utilizing our leadership abilities, but recognizing that we're not there yet? So I'm going to share real quickly. So you're going to pull out your phone, or you can open another screen on your computer. Go to menti.com. You can do this on your phone or your computer, and you use the code 393095. you're going to start on the first one. You're going to say, what most impacted your decision to become a female pastor? Was it your family? Was it the call of God? Other credentialed women? Your senior pastor? Scripture? Staff pastors? Lay leaders? I'm just curious from you, like what impacted your stepping out and becoming a female pastor? If you guys want to log in, put in that code. It's working. I haven't seen anybody do it. It takes a little while to rank it. Because part of what, is it working? Okay, good. It should be updating. Oh, there we go. Woo, there we go. Now, that's awesome. So we'll see as you guys all go through, you'll see it kind of update with what impacted you the most to the least. I think for me, it was the call of God was the most important thing. My family not being Christians, they didn't necessarily want me to be in, or didn't really understand what it'd be like to be in ministry. Okay, we've got 2 people who filled it out. We've got some awesome women on this call today. I am humbled. You guys should be leading the webinars. It's good. We've got 3 people. That's great. All right, the next one will be a little easier, I think. So we've got most people put the call of God, other credentialed women, and the last being my senior pastor. I'll not say anything on there. All right, so this is just the kind of a ranking. How would you describe your experience as a female pastor in your current ministry setting? Where you're at right now, how would you describe your experience so far? You're encouraged and empowered, or maybe you find resistance. You lack confidence. That's often, I know when I was younger, just getting started, the confidence, even still, when I stepped into this role, you know, confidence played a big part in how I led. I speak up when I know I can add value to a conversation. Oh, don't. I am right where God wants me to be. My God-given calling is lining up with my current ministry responsibilities. So as each of you puts in, it'll change. I'm encouraged. That's cool. Disagree. That's good. Hopefully you're all in healthy situations. I know it's not always the case. And sometimes you're in a great, healthy church, but there's people around you that maybe have resistance to you as the leader. I'll go on to the next one. All right. And, oh, we got one more. Nice. That's great. And the last one is, what is your biggest obstacle as a female pastor? If you could just put in a quick sentence or a couple of words, what's your biggest obstacle as a female pastor? Seems like most of this group is in pretty good situations, feeling like they're where God's called them to be. Maybe you're like, I don't have any obstacles as a female pastor. Maybe it's just you have obstacles as a pastor. That's good. The attitude. Sometimes it's not even the pastors, right? It's the church people that mess us up and don't think we should be doing what we're doing. Yeah, their attitude really gets it. No, they need to cover, champion women. Yes, I agree. I agree. Patronizing. Can't see this one. The structure of how leadership is chosen and recognized. As a married minister, my husband is still the one recognized and approached. Absolutely. I feel fortunate in that. Ooh, pastors' wives. So the one box is both the pastor's wife and the pastor. That's awesome. And it's true. Yeah, it is interesting. That's an interesting one. You know, sitting down with pastors' wives and talking to them about what their call is. And some of them, they're just as called as they feel like they would have been a pastor whether their husband was or not. And some of them, their call is to serve their husband and whatever that means, or their call is to serve in the family in some way. So old mindsets. Yep. I feel in some ways for both of those, I feel fortunate. My husband is not a pastor and he serves outside of the church. And so in ways it gives me the clear, like there's not that gray area, but I understand that would be very difficult because they're probably they're supposing who you are as a leader and that your call is secondary. I totally understand. That's great feedback. That's super helpful. Well, the reason I selected the title of Be the Elephant in the Room is because sometimes our presence is the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, but it makes everyone uncomfortable. What I want to encourage, hopefully from today, that I would encourage you to continue stepping into those situations where it makes other people uncomfortable, maybe makes you uncomfortable, and don't feel like you have to address it. Don't feel like you have to solve it, but just keep stepping into those roles. I am going to share the next screen. But maybe those of you who are able to speak into the conversation, maybe just share in like 30 seconds to a minute, since there's a smaller group of us, what is your story? Where have you come from in ministry, and where are you at right now? Maybe just like 30 seconds. We'll make it quick. Who can share?
If you're unsure how to unmute yourself, all you have to do is just kind of wave at me or put something in the chat and I can help you.
I'll share. My situation is probably different than most years because I was raised overseas as a missionary kid. So I was raised in an environment where, even though it's a very machista culture in Latin America, there were always women in leadership, and all the missionaries' wives were always very involved. So it was something that it was modeled for us, and we were able to have a lot of freedom. I had more of a challenge moving back to the States when we would come back to this culture where we said we were equal, but it obviously wasn't. But as a missionary evangelist, that's been my biggest obstacle has been finding a way to bridge the gap between the way I saw myself growing up and as a minister overseas, and then coming back to the States and realizing that the dichotomy of what I thought American culture was.
That's good. Thanks for sharing, Cindy. Anyone else want to share? Willing to share?
I'll share. I have a unique situation as being in a representative position on the executive presbytery. They look for me to represent the women ministers. So for many of the men that are on that committee, I feel that they can accept me in that role, but often I do not feel that they consider me as an equal. And so it's, I feel like in a sense, they are required to put up with me in that position. And I think it's nice that Adelita Garza just was elected to serve. In fact, she won the election over a man. So it kind of has, it'll be interesting to see how the other men on the committee can accept her.
There's a theory out there about tokenism, that if your main, and this is a caution for female leaders, that if your main thrust in ministry is women empowerment, then you will only be able to speak into that area of leadership, that you will kind of get pigeonholed as like, yeah, you can talk about that stuff, but this is the stuff, this is other leadership things. So it's really, you know, I think, Carla, that's a really tough role that you're in, well-meaning to bring females to the table, but it is easy to say like, well, when we need her opinion on something, then we'll solicit it if it pertains to female pastors. So
unfortunately, probably for people that have that attitude, they don't realize that I am going to speak up anyway, because I know what I'm called to do. So.
Yeah, that's great. That's good. I saw Kathy put something on the chat.
Yeah, Kathy Benson says, I'm not able to speak because I'm in a public place, so here's my story. Called to be officially recognized as a minister through licensing, but still not recognized within my husband's circle of pastoral friends. Still seen as the pastor's wife or systems person, but not recognized with my own voice to bring knowledge and experience. Thank you for sharing, Kathy.
I don't know if Sandy can share. I know she had a unique experience when she went over to Greece. I don't know if you're able to share, Sandy. I'd love for them to hear your story. She probably can't share, but it was eye-opening for sure.
Okay, sure. I grew up in a egalitarian family and church, and embraced ministry calling at 19, and then served alongside my husband in ministry. And then we were sent to Greece. And from the moment I literally got off the boat, because we drove from Germany, our previous assignment, and then took the ferry to Greece. From the very first moment, everything I encountered was no. Paul said women have to be silent. And the answer to everything, I wasn't allowed to stand unless a man was next to me. I was told what to wear, take my earrings out. I wasn't allowed to stand in the pulpit. I wasn't allowed to teach if men were in the class. And it really was a humbling time to try to find my place and my voice. We spent 10 years there, and we made some progress. And probably the most meaningful moment was as we were leaving, and the equivalent of their general superintendent asked me to give a farewell greeting to the church. And I went to stand where I always stood. And he said, no, sister, please come and stand behind the pulpit. So progress, but still very, very slow.
Awesome. Maybe a couple more or one more?
Yeah, one thing that has been somewhat of a reoccurring theme in my ministry life is the fact that my husband is not a minister. And yet when we go to things together, it's, you know, if it's people who know me, obviously they know, but you know, if we're walking in somewhere at like network conference and we're together, a lot of times people just assume, they'll walk up to him and say, hey, where do you pastor, brother? And he just points at me, you know, and that also creates some issues for him, because he feels a little bit out of place because they don't have pastors' husbands luncheons and things like that. So that's been some of a reoccurring theme, you know, and we work through it with humor and grace, but it is something that he gets teased a lot. I say he's the best pastor's wife that I've ever known, and he just laughs at that. But it is often the assumption, if we go somewhere together, that they just assume that he's the pastor, and it's just a quick correction, but it's recurring for sure.
Well, I'm going to get into kind of the background that I wanted to share today, and then how we can move forward in grace. I shared, that's not where we're supposed to be. Sorry. So your story matters. It matters whether you've been through some really hard things or you've had some really spectacular wins. It's important to continue to share your story with those around you, so that you can be unified in understanding that this is not a dead issue, this is still ongoing. But sometimes there's something about sharing your story that you feel like God can use. Even if you've been through some painful things, God can redeem that by encouraging another in what they're going through. So I'm going to get into the feminist theology. And so the theology defined is, it's the promotion of the full humanity of women. And the understanding is whatever denies, diminishes, or distorts the full humanity of women is therefore appraised as not redemptive. Rosemary Radford Ruther is described as one of the foremost theologians of feminist theology. And I will say this, so feminist theology can be put into two categories. What most people think of feminist theology is like Mother Earth, feminism, like ecology, all of that side, very radical, and that's the radical side. But there's the feminist theology that they're seeking to work within the confines of the traditional patriarchal church, whether it's the Catholic Church, Protestant Church, and find healing and restored roles of women within that. But I love some of the things she talks about. So her thought is that theology thus far has been shaped by male experience rather than human experience. So as we look back over kind of what our doctrines are, even the translations of the Bible were done by men from a male perspective. And so feminist theology needs to kind of revisit that with the understanding that women have an equal place. Sexism, ultimately, I love the way she defines this, is when we perceive the image of God, I'm going to say image of God because I don't like to say it in Latin because I can't, as only representing men. So the full image of God is both male and female, and we confirm that in scripture. But that's ultimately what sexism is seeing that women are not quite the full image of God, representing the full image. And so the goal of feminist theology is to reconcile the patriarchal, traditionally male-dominated history of the Judeo-Christianity. And she uses the lens of a prophetic liberating tradition, meaning the prophets and Jesus came to bring freedom to the oppressed. I'll show you in this. So that basically God was declared in Isaiah as the divine advocate of the oppressed. Jesus quoted Isaiah saying, "The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, for he has anointed me to bring good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim that captives will be released, that the blind will see, that the oppressed will be set free, and that the time of the Lord's favor has come." So the understand, oh, I'll go back. So basically what I'm saying is this. God from the beginning had a plan of freeing the oppressed. And up until the 60s, women were considered oppressed, Jew nor Greek, male nor female, slave nor free. That God has been throughout history, has been seeking to redeem and free the oppressed. And so God, through the feminist theology, the belief is that God has now in history finally redeemed and brought equal place for the female in society. To give you an example of how translations by men kind of made the Bibles read a certain way, and this can be your elevator speech for anyone who's questioning, why do you believe a female can be a pastor? I was at a conference at a church that I knew was, all women were ministers. They were not given the title of pastor. They could not serve in the elder boards. There was no leadership. And so I had one of the board members ask me, why do you understand that? Why is that your understanding? And so this is basically the thing. Well, in Romans, Paul, when describing Phoebe, used the Greek word diakonos, which many people have translated to servant. However, that word diakonos should be translated deacon, because that was the same word that also was used to describe the role of ministry of Jesus. And so Phoebe is one of the clear examples of a word that was being used to describe a female. But because people in the past have been translating it or reading it a certain way, their understanding was that a female could never assume the same role of leadership as a man. And so that was their assumption. Well, now we have this, now because God has brought equal leadership to females, that is how we translate that now. And that's looking through the lens of both male and female being the full image of God. That's why we now get that. But like I said, the reality is that's not our reality. We still have levels of sexism. We still have favoritism. We still have people who don't think we should be, assumptions. So our reality, we hope that we could just work together alongside men, each having our gifts and strengths and abilities, but that's not the reality. So this is the problem I want to address. How do I accomplish what God has called me to do when my presence makes others uncomfortable or causes frustration? So I'm going to share the first one. First, you have to focus on condition over comfort. God is more concerned with your heart and your condition than for you to be comfortable. Sometimes we have to be in those uncomfortable situations, and God's going to do those things in our heart. He didn't call us to be comfortable. He called us to grow in Christ-likeness. So I imagine, Sandy, those 10 years you were in Greece, God did a lot of loving and growing in you in grace and favor. And the same with everyone else in here. The hard things he takes you through are not because he wants us to be comfortable, but because he's growing us to be more like Christ. And God will use those situations to grow your humility and your identity. You see, because you can't change the people around you. You can't change that church member that doesn't like you. You can't change that pastor that doesn't invite you to meetings because you're a female, but you can change how it affects you. That's what you have control over, is allowing what people do to affect you or not affect you. So focus on God. What are you trying to teach me in this? How are you growing my humility? Even when you think your humility can't grow anymore, God, what are you trying to teach me in this to walk through it? And we've all seen those people that grate against it, don't they? And that they allow the difficulty to ruin their spirit and wreck their heart in ministry because they're so frustrated being seen as less than. So I think a good question to ask yourself is, do these things, do they grate against me? Or have I now gotten to a place where it rolls off my back, where I accept it? When someone assumes I've been assumed to be the church secretary, or be assumed to be the spouse or the daughter or whatever. And it's like, no, I've been called to be a pastor from long before. I remember I used to, I even still do it. We try to correct people, and that almost never goes well. I remember I was self-conscious about people thinking that I only got a job at the church because I married the pastor's son. And I said, no. I was on staff. I was on the leadership team before I ever got married to the pastor's son. God called me. I knew I had a future. And I always felt like I had to correct people. No, this is what God has called me to do. I'm not joining the family business. And so that's easy to happen, where we feel like we have to set people straight. No, that's not how it is. But they almost always, and you probably have people do that to you, that's just your own insecurity instead of just trusting in what God has called you to do. God's word in 1 Corinthians, he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weakness, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. We know that as we submit in those situations to allowing God to use us in spite of the difficulties, that God can do even more powerful work than if we were to be on our own strength. The next thing we can focus on is rollover title. We've all met people, or maybe at some point been that person where we said, no, pastor, I'm a pastor. Or maybe there were people on your team that were given the title pastor that didn't earn it, and you were in the process of earning it, and they're like, you're not going to get it until you earn it. And so what I want to encourage you is focus on the role God has given you, and do not get hung up on the title. Titles ultimately, what is a title, right? It's about what you're doing. Focus on doing what you can do. Because you know what? God taught me as I was one of those people that I had to hit all the check marks. They weren't going to give me there hadn't been a female pastor. For a short time there was, but at my church, there hadn't been a female pastor. So they weren't just going to give it to me. They're like, you need to officially get your license and be a pastor before we will call you a pastor. And I said, okay, like I didn't feel like it was fair because I saw other people getting the title pastor that I knew had not gone through the same process. But my role wasn't dependent on what my title was. I felt like God showed me that God taught me that in as he was humbling me through that process and saying, are you interested in the title, or are you just here to serve no matter what your title is? And so I got over the whole title thing. It took a little while, like focusing on what is your role and how can you best serve, and not focusing on trying to correct people. The next one is focus on building bridges, not barriers. Those people who get bitter and frustrated, all they do is create walls around them that then no one wants to work with them. I think we've all met the female pastor who's disgruntled, frustrated, alienated, isolating, and no one wants to work with her. She kind of gets that, like, that she's got that look on her face all the time. She's got something to prove every time she walks in the room. And that's not a bridge builder. That's not going to create change. That's only going to create more barriers to seeing things go forward. So we have to lead with grace. We have to, when people call us the wrong thing or assume the wrong thing, I still have people, we show up, they know that they're inviting the student ministries director from the network to come, and I come and they start talking to my husband. And he's like, no, that's not me. I don't do that. So we can either allow that to cause us to be bitter, or we can say, I'm going to lead with grace. I'm going to forgive easily. I'm going to move on quickly rather than rolling around in that muck, because really it just poisons our soul and poisons our spirit of grace. And respond lovingly to them. Be kind and gracious. Another thing that really helps in building bridges, especially if you're working with, I work with predominantly men. I think like 90% of youth pastors are men. I think if you look at the grand scheme, I think we're at like 75% across the board in our network is men. But youth pastors, it's like even higher. It's like there's under 10 that are female youth pastors. I really focus on also meeting the spouse and not leaving the spouse out of the equation. That helps me build a bridge into that home, because I know that if the spouse knows me and the spouse knows I care about them just as much as I care about their husband, that then I have a gateway to be able to work with them. And there's a comfort level, there's a respect level, and it's just, it's human, it's just good practice to always have a relationship with them and not feel like there will be times, I appreciated so much, I went back and listened to what Beth said about when you go to a meeting, don't feel like you got to go sit with all the wives, like go sit with all the men. Sometimes you got to be okay with just sitting with the women, and you got to say, I'm going to focus on, at this time, I'm going to focus on building the relationship, but then there's other times where I do step in. So making sure you balance both building those relationships as well, because especially if you're on staff with men, you're spending so much time with them, way more than you are with the spouses. And so in those times where there is a couple, spend time with the spouse, get to know them, because you're going to see the male counterparts in the office the next week. And then the next part I would say is this: we have to do excellent work. If we want to make an impact, what we do has to be excellent. God will reward you. One thing, I'm just going to give some really practical things. One thing I would do, because men tend to think differently than women. And especially if you're walking into a situation where maybe men are not used to giving women opportunities to lead or give input, what I would do is I would actually seek input ahead of time. Like say I was working on something, and I would go ahead of time and set up a meeting, and I would seek that input on the front end and answer any questions they had. And that, especially if it was like my lead pastor, like, hey, this is what I'm thinking, this is what I'm working on, I wanted to see what your input was. And this is the secret sauce, I'm going to give this to you. I always tried to tie in something that was important to them, either through their passion or their vision statement, something that I hear them say all the time. I always try to tie in what's important to them into what I am doing. I always want to help make the connection from what I am doing and how I am leading and what I am accomplishing, with tying it directly in with the lead pastor. I tell this to staff pastors too all the time. The senior pastor is a very lonely, very isolating role. And how much more support do they feel when they know the things you're working on are directly related to what they are passionate about, what they're driven by. So trying to get that input from them and tying it in with what you're doing. Because I tell this to staff people, if what you're working on doesn't accomplish the senior pastor's vision, why are you even doing it? And so for women, some of that's just language. It's just understanding language, or maybe there's a misunderstanding. So how can you tie in with what your supervisor is asking of you? How can you relate it back to, I am doing this because I heard you say in a meeting you want to accomplish this. And so I tried to tie it back in so they would understand what I'm trying to accomplish is what they want to accomplish. We want the same things, and it gives me a little more freedom to take some leadership roles. Another thing, this is interesting, and I've had some women push back on me, but I was doing some research on some different leadership theories. And for women, the predominant, so women can lead in a variety of styles. They can be directive, they can be more passive, they can be more collaborative. But the research shows that because we still have, like say a manager role or a lead pastor role, because those roles have such a male, because there's characteristics that are predominantly prescribed as male, as in dominant, aggressive, decisive, like those are all character traits that you would say, our culture says those are male traits. They would not ascribe those traditionally as female traits, because people say a manager, a pastor, a leader is dominating, is decisive, all of those things, that when you put a female in that role, it's difficult, because you're putting a female in a role where you traditionally would like to see them be dominating and aggressive and assertive. However, research shows that a female who operates in those styles is generally less effective than those who take a more collaborative approach. I think part of it is just people are getting used to women having leadership roles. And so generally having a more collaborative, seeking input, being a team builder, and I'll just say from personal experience, I one time had a male manager who gave me instructions in how to handle a male subordinate. They said, I want you to handle, it was like a disciplinary issue, I want you to handle it like this. I handled it exactly how they would have handled it, and it did not go well, because there's certain things that I'm just going to be honest, I'm just being super honest. There's certain ways that a male leader can respond that I can't do it the same way. And that partially, that's just not who I am. That's not who God made me to be. I'm just going to be honest. I am not like I can be very type A and dominating and all of that, but that's just not, I can't do it exactly how my male manager told me to do it. I have to lead in my own style. But going back to, you do have to find your voice and your specific leadership style. And sometimes if you've got men above you and below you that are not as comfortable with a female leader, it helps to take a more collaborative approach. Now, I'll caution you with this. I used to I would bring ideas to our team meeting, and I was the only female in the room at the time. And I would get so frustrated because I would bring these great projects and plans and ideas, and they would just shoot me down. They would shoot me down. And I was so frustrated. And so I finally went to the lead pastor afterward, and I said, what am I doing wrong? They said, the way you're presenting it, it doesn't seem like you have confidence and that you've really put a lot of thought into it. So I was overcorrecting in my collaborativeness. I had put in hours and hours and hours of work into what I was working on. But when I presented it, I was so yeah, I was thinking this, and what do you guys think? I just made it way more loose, and I wasn't as direct, and this is what I'm thinking, this is the plan, and then this is what I need from you. So I've really changed my style in how I communicate, that especially if you're talking to a lead pastor or a leader over you, I explain what I've worked on. I've explained how that's going to impact the organization. And then I usually leave a small part to say, I would love your input on this part. And so I give them a small, or I need you to give me the freedom to go back and execute, or what do you need me to fix? Do you need me to fix this part? What are your thoughts on that? So I don't leave the whole thing open, I need your input on everything. I get really specific and say, how does this work? Can you give me feedback on this one part? So does that make sense to you guys, what I'm saying? I hope this is helpful. I'm just giving you my practical experience. And so it's super important that how you go about your work, that you focus on doing what you have the power to do. Maybe you're serving in a role, and this may have nothing to do with your gender. It may have to do with your experience in ministry or your newness on a team. And they've only given you like this much of what should be a larger job description. Just focus on the piece that they've given you and do it with excellence. Whatever they give to you, don't focus on what you wish you could be doing. Focus on what you've been tasked with. Do it with excellence, and God will open the doors. They will see, they will recognize the gifts and abilities you have, and they will give you more opportunities to lead. It may be a slow process, but just focus on that. This is a good scripture. I mean, a man's gifts and woman's gifts makes room for them and brings him before the great. Your gifts and your abilities, God will utilize and open more doors. If you keep the right attitude and the right spirit, God will open those doors for you to lead more in more ways than you ever thought you could. And finally, take the initiative. I think the most, for me, the things that have really expanded my leadership roles has when I took the initiative on something. When I was on staff, I was the children's pastor, and we went through a large church staff transition. And we had no worship pastor, we had no youth pastor, we had no small groups pastor. I was a children's pastor. And I just started doing whatever the church needed me to do. I said, do you need me to help? I just offered. I said, do you want me to post the job posting for the worship pastor? The senior pastor was like, yes, please. Do you want me to do this? Do you want me to help come up with a small group plan? Do you want me to recruit some volunteers to help with the outreach event? Like I didn't focus on just what I was doing. I was taking the initiative and saying, I saw a need. I asked if I could help. They said yes, and I just started leading. And that's honestly how I became the executive pastor. I was doing all the roles of the executive pastor before they gave me the role. They finally were like, well, you're kind of doing it all. So like when I became the executive pastor, they didn't just then add all the roles on me. I was already doing them. I was like helped through the hiring process of the worship. I'm the children's pastor, and I'm helping through the hiring process of the worship pastor, because what happened is the senior pastor saw I was willing to serve. I didn't need a raise in salary. I didn't need a job title change to start giving everything that God had for me. So taking the initiative. The second thing is taking the initiative to learn from those outside of your organization. I got to go speak at a conference, literally got the invite because I reached out to a high-level staff member on staff at a church, and I said, can I just take an hour or two of your time and just pick your brain? And so I showed up at people are all, how many of you would say no to someone coming to learn from you, right? None of us, all of us want to feel like we have something to offer. And I'm telling you, that doesn't change when you get higher up in the organization. You still want to know that people want to learn something from you. And so I got invited to speak at a conference because I sat down with this high-level leader, and I shouldn't have been at that conference, but they saw something in me that I was taking the initiative. I was asking questions. Literally that's all I did was set up an appointment, ask them. I mean, it ended up being like a 3-hour meeting where I just was learning more and more and more, all tying back into what I was doing at the church. But they saw that I was hungry, that I was passionate, that I was engaged, that I was driven, that how I was thinking. They were able to meet me as a result of that. The second thing, and this is actually how I ended up in this role, I did the exact same thing with Pastor Rich. God had kind of put in my heart for a couple of months. He does that coffee with Pastor Rich. And I was the executive pastor. I loved where I was at. And I just reached out. I said, hey, I'd love to get coffee with you. I just want to get to know you. Same thing. I went in with my binder, with my list I had like 3 pages of questions with lines to fill in the answers, the same thing. And within he's used to when people come meet with him, they're wanting a job. And within the 30 seconds, he's like, are you wanting to be a senior pastor? I'm like, no. Like, that's not why I'm here. Like, I love where I'm at. I just felt like God, I wanted to get to know you. I wanted to see what I could learn from you, because every person has a different perspective and we can learn from their perspectives. How can we take what they see and build it into what we're doing? I'm going to wrap up in just a minute. And what ended up happening is I started asking questions, and then after 15, 20 minutes, then suddenly he flips the table, starts asking me questions. And then it literally turns into a job interview. And I'm like, I left that meeting. I called my husband. I said, I have no idea why, but he wants to talk to me about coming to work at the network office. And my husband's like, what? And then he asked me what? And I was like, with students? He's like, what? But what happened is Pastor Rich, in that meeting, God used that meeting with a leader with a heart to learn. And this is all God. Honestly, this is all God has just taught me this and brought great mentors in my life to teach me these lessons. The power of a good question. A good question, it shows the way you think. If you just ask simple questions, but thinking, what's a really, like if you have the opportunity to be in an elevator with a high level leader, do you have a really good question you want to ask them? Or if you're at network conference and you see someone, a presbyter or someone, and you're like, what's a good question I can ask them? How could they impact me? How could I glean something from them? There's something powerful about a person asking a powerful question. So those would be my encouragements to you. I hope this was helpful. I'd love to move into Q&A time. And yes, I'm sorry if it wasn't all you hoped for, but this has been my perspective and I appreciate you guys. So yes.
Thank you, Joanne. I think this has been great. And we've had some really great interaction even in the chat while you were talking. And there was just a couple of things. I'm just going to bring this up, but if anybody has any questions, please feel free to raise your hand or unmute yourself and jump in. But I'm just going to go back real quick. Let's see. Sandy Morgan says, Joanne, what do you think of the Canadian Anglicans' decision to intentionally avoid using male gendered language referring to God?
That's the hard part. That's the part I left out, which is the whole feminist theology has gone all the way down the road. Gosh, I don't know that I have an opinion. There's people that are way more theologically versed in this that I just know enough to be dangerous, mostly to myself. But yeah, that's the hard part, is where people, because that lady I talked about, she's gone on and she's put gay and lesbian in the category of the oppressed. She's put it's just like the transgender in the category of the oppressed, and God's come to redeem, which I believe that is true. God has come to redeem them, but that she does promote. She's from the Catholic Church. She promotes same-sex marriage and all of that. So that's where that has kind of gone. But I still, I believe that our theology with the Assemblies of God is very right on. And yes, I try not to talk too much about that. I'm sorry, Sandy. I bet Ava can answer that.
Ava, do you want to chime in? Oh, she did put in the chat. Ava said, good question for one of our renowned scholars. Great content for another webinar, with a smiley face. Yeah, anybody else have any questions or comments or anything? There's Ava. Let me unmute you. There you go, Ava.
Am I, okay, I'm on?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, so I just wanted to point out, well, everything that you shared, Joanne, is awesome and amazing. And it's so important to be reminded of this, but also to point out some of the things that we don't think about. And I love that a couple of things I just wanted to highlight. I love that you pointed out for the importance and value of for us to expand our ideas of where we can network. And so to even go outside of our denominational structure, when our own leaders see how applauded we are in other settings too, it just bolsters our credentials and it kind of gets them to look twice. So not that we're trying to be manipulative or anything, but it's just for females, it's a great opportunity and a great way to expand your ministry platform. And then the other thing I thought was so great, Joanne, what you said was just the whole idea of like developing your own unique style of leadership. And there's so much great literature out there. One of the greatest research projects that was ever done is by McKinsey and Company, and they did like this big study. It's called Women Matter Too, and it was a global study for how women succeed in leadership and how they thrive and where they thrive the most all over the world in different cultural settings. And the bottom line is what women are encouraged to do is to own their own unique style, find their own voice, and develop that so that we feel comfortable in our own style of leadership. We grow to strengthen it, we fine tune it, we want to become more effective, we want to be more effective speakers. We're always improving, but we don't have to be like a male leader. We just have to be strong in our own unique personality. And as we grow, our personality changes and evolves because God is growing and changing us. And so just leaning into that. So I just wanted to endorse what Joanne was saying. It's so, so important.
That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Ava. I really appreciate you chiming in. And your article is great. If you guys have not subscribed to our newsletter, you can do that very easily just by even going to our Facebook page. There's a place where you can subscribe to the newsletter, but Ava put out a really great article all about finding your voice, and that went out yesterday. So if you are subscribed, check your inbox. And if you didn't get it, check your spam folder. Kathy Benton says, I agree, Ava. Going outside of the familiar structures help to broaden us as learners and to formulate our values in a more concise way. It deepens us as individuals, which is so great. So great. And Sandy's asking, did anybody see the national NWM podcast with Superintendent Doug Clay? I did, and it was excellent. So yeah. And we actually put a link to all of the national NWM podcasts in the newsletter. So if you didn't get a chance to see that, you can check those out. Anybody else have any questions or comments before we wrap up? Oh, let me help you out here, Ava.
Yeah. So I just want to say kudos, thanks to Nikki for organizing and taking care of all the technical piece of making this happen. I just logged on. That was all I had to do, and she took care of everything. And so just want to point out, thanks so much, Nikki, for doing such a great job. You're so professional, you speak so well, and you're so articulate, and you just make everybody else shine. And of course, just thank you so much to Joanne. You're awesome.
We all need God's continuing grace in all the roles we serve in. I would just end with this. Make sure you network outside of females. It's very important that you don't let your own insecurity or fear keep you from having a conversation with someone. I literally am an example of a total life shift as a result of one meeting. And I am humbled to be able to serve. And also, don't try not to pigeonhole yourself on just this topic. You can speak, all of you I know can speak on way more issues than just being a female leader and what that unique thing is. So I encourage you to be a leader, whether there's men or women in the room. I was at the DYD conference when I had literally just been nominated, and 2 months, like a month later, I was in Springfield. And it was the first time a non-ethnic network had a female DYD. And so there was literally only one other woman there of like 40 people. And they all were making comments about my husband and me. And I just got up and I said, you know what, male, female, I'm just a leader. And ultimately, male, female, all of you in this room, you're a leader. And God is using you. God has called you. Don't let anyone discourage you in that call. And just continue moving forward in that. But thank you guys so much if there's anything I can do, I'm here to serve and encourage you along the way, pray for you, encourage you, help you find, if you're in a place where you're not, maybe God's moving you on from, I'd be happy to help connect you with pastors that I know are champions of female pastors. So.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Joanne. Just so you know, as we close out today, I'm going to upload this so you can catch the replay if you missed any slides or if you missed any of the stats that she posted or anything like that. It'll be available for replay. And since you're on here, it means that we have your email address. So I will send it to your inbox So, and then if you feel like there's any friends or anybody that you think needs to hear this information, encourage them to sign up and register so that they can catch the replay as well. And don't forget, if you're not a part of our Facebook group, we have a great community of female ministers that are not just from SoCal. We have some that don't have the support in their networks, so we've invited them to be included in ours. It's a great place for resources, ask for prayer, anything like that. And we are here as a team as well. So Ava, our president, and Shelby Britos is our vice president. Emily Sombrito is our treasurer, and I'm the secretary. So if there's anything that we can do to just be a support to you guys, like Joanne said, and then Carla is our female EP. So we are all here as a team to support you and to help you to have a multi-gender. We want to make sure that this isn't just something where you are only surrounded by female leaders, like Joanne said. We want you to be able to succeed in a male context, a female context, a mixed gendered context, whatever it is that you find yourself in, whatever God has called you to. We want you to lead well. And we are so grateful, Joanne, that you really highlighted what it means to lead well in uncomfortable situations, because I know we've all been there. So with that said, we will have another coffee hour in August, and we will post that date soon. The coffee hours are just casual get-together where we can chat and just talk about things. And they're not recorded because it's a little bit more of a casual atmosphere. There's no teaching that day, but I'll post that in the group. And in the meantime, thank you, ladies, for joining us. I pray that you are just leading well in your context, and that God continues to not just comfort you in your difficult situations, but continue to challenge you, because that's where you're going to continue to grow. So thank you, everybody, so much. And I hope you guys have a great day. Bye-bye.